Mr. Frank asked me once a day, please, Miep, I have a cigarette. I want to ask you, we will go in hiding. Are you ready to help us? Na de oorlog, ja, daar kreeg ik meer tijd om over die dingen na te denken. Maar ja, Jan en ik, we zaten toch met het probleem, we hebben 7 mensen verloren. En dat kan je niet opzij schuiven. Dat kwam steeds weer terug.
Would you risk everything to protect a secret? In Nazi-occupied Amsterdam, Miep Gies didn't just make a single brave choice, she made countless ones every day as she shielded 8 lives from relentless danger. But her story isn't just about courage, it's about quiet humanity in the face of overwhelming evil. Courage doesn't start with big decisions, Miep Gies reflected later in life. It begins quietly, in the choices we make every day. Hers was a story that began humbly, an ordinary life shaped by extraordinary times. But even before the shadow of war darkened Europe, the seeds of her bravery had already been sown. Miep Gies was born as Hermine Santruschitz on February 15, 1909, in Vienna, Austria-Hungary. Her early life unfolded in the tumultuous aftermath of World War I, a period marked by political instability and economic despair. Austria, once part of a vast empire, was struggling to find its footing as a newly formed republic. Families like the Santruschitz bore the brunt of this upheaval, living with scarcity as a daily reality. Food was painfully scarce in Vienna during those years. For young Hermine, malnutrition became a constant companion, robbing her of the carefree days of childhood. Her parents, desperate to improve her chances of survival, made a heart-wrenching decision. Through an international program aimed at helping war-stricken children, they sent her to the Netherlands, where she would live temporarily with a foster family. At just 11 years old, Hermine boarded a train bound for Leiden, Netherlands. The journey was both frightening and exhilarating, a leap into the unknown. Upon arrival, she was welcomed into the Nieuwenburg family's modest home. The Nieuwenburgs, though not wealthy, offered her a warmth and stability that had been missing in Vienna. They called her Miep, a Dutch diminutive that quickly replaced her formal given name. What was meant to be a temporary arrangement turned into a permanent new life when her biological parents, seeing how much she had thrived, allowed her to stay. In Leiden, Miep flourished. She learned Dutch with astonishing speed, mastering not only the language but the cultural nuances of her new homeland. By the time she reached her teenage years, Miep had fully embraced her Dutch identity. She was industrious, kind-hearted, and determined to make the most of the opportunities she had been given. At 18, she moved to Amsterdam in search of work. The bustling city offered her the chance to carve out an independent life, but the Great Depression made jobs hard to come by. For a time, Miep lived frugally, taking on whatever work she could find to support herself. Despite the challenges, she maintained a quiet optimism that would later define her character in darker times. In 1933, a chance opportunity changed her trajectory. Through an acquaintance, she learned about a secretarial position at a small company called Opekta. The business specialized in selling pectin, an essential ingredient for making jam. Miep's fluency in both Dutch and German made her an ideal candidate, and she was quickly hired. Opekta's manager was Otto Frank, a recent refugee from Germany. In 1933, Adolf Hitler had risen to power, and Otto, a German Jew, had seen the writing on the wall. He relocated his family, his wife Edith and daughters Margot and Anne, to Amsterdam, hoping to escape the wave of anti-Semitism sweeping across Europe. Otto was unlike any boss Miep had worked for before. He was meticulous yet compassionate, a man deeply committed to both his business and his family. Miep admired his calm demeanor and strong work ethic. Over time, she became more than just his secretary. She became a trusted confidant, and eventually, a friend to the entire Frank family. Miep's bond with the Franks extended beyond the workplace. She visited their home on occasion, sharing meals and conversations that left her charmed by the precocious Anne and her studious older sister Margot. Anne, in particular, fascinated Miep with her quick wit and boundless curiosity. Miep had no children of her own, but her maternal instincts found an outlet in her affection for the Frank girls. As Miep settled into her new job, her personal life blossomed as well. In 1936, she met Miep Gies, a tall, thoughtful social worker who shared her values of kindness and justice. Their courtship was unassuming but deeply meaningful. Jan admired Miep's tenacity and independence, while she was drawn to his quiet strength and compassion. The couple married in 1941, just months after the German occupation of the Netherlands began. Their wedding was a modest affair, held in a time when celebration felt almost defiant. Though the shadow of war loomed over their lives, Miep and Jan found solace in each other. Their shared commitment to helping others would soon define the most perilous chapter of their lives. The 1930s had been a period of unease for many, but by 1940, the reality of war was impossible to ignore. On May 10, 1940, German forces invaded the Netherlands, shattering the fragile neutrality the country had hoped to maintain. Within 5 days, the Dutch government surrendered, and the occupying forces began implementing the policies of the Third Reich. Amsterdam, once a vibrant city of tolerance and trade, became a place of fear and oppression. For Jewish residents like the Frank family, life grew increasingly precarious. The Nazis enacted a series of laws designed to isolate and persecute Jews. They were required to register their religion, wear yellow stars, and adhere to strict curfews. Businesses were Aryanized, forcing Jewish owners to relinquish control. Miep watched these changes with growing alarm. Her boss and friend, Otto Frank, now faced existential threats simply for being Jewish. Though Miep was not Jewish herself, she felt the weight of these injustices acutely. As the Nazis tightened their grip, she and Jan quietly began to discuss how they might help those at risk. Even before the Frank family went into hiding, Miep began taking small risks to push back against the tide of oppression. She refused to join Nazi-affiliated organizations and avoided interactions with collaborators whenever possible. Her moral compass was unwavering, guided by the belief that silence in the face of injustice was tantamount to complicity. At Opekta, Miep continued to work closely with Otto, who was already laying the groundwork for his family's eventual retreat into hiding. She noticed the strain on his face, the weight of worry that seemed to deepen with each passing day. Though he didn't say much at first, Miep sensed that Otto was preparing for something monumental. By the end of 1940, Miep's life had shifted in ways she could never have predicted. The quiet secretary from Vienna had become a witness to history, standing at the threshold of decisions that would define her legacy. For now, she carried on as before, doing her job, supporting her husband, and remaining a loyal friend to the Frank family. The choices Miep would face in the coming years were unlike anything she had ever imagined. Yet the values instilled in her from childhood, empathy, resilience, and an unwavering sense of right and wrong, would guide her through the darkness. In the small moments of her daily life, Miep was already preparing for the extraordinary role she would soon play in history. The rules kept changing, tightening like a noose, Miep Gies later recalled. Every day, the walls of freedom grew smaller until there was nowhere left to turn. As 1940 gave way to 1941, life in Amsterdam transformed from uneasy occupation to a full-fledged regime of oppression. For Miep and those she loved, the choice became clear: stand by or stand up. The summer of 1940 brought the harsh reality of occupation to the Netherlands. German soldiers patrolled the cobblestone streets of Amsterdam, their presence a constant reminder of the New World Order. What had once been a bustling, tolerant city now felt suffocating. Resistance efforts were beginning to bubble beneath the surface, but fear kept many silent. People whispered, wondering what might come next. For Miep, the changes were impossible to ignore. New rules came in quick succession: curfews, censorship, and a growing network of Nazi informants who seemed to lurk everywhere. The city she had come to love now felt alien, transformed into a stage for repression. Friends and neighbors she had known for years disappeared seemingly overnight, their absence explained in hushed tones. For the Jewish community, life became especially precarious. Shops were closed, bank accounts frozen, and livelihoods destroyed. Miep witnessed the heartbreak firsthand at work. Otto Frank's once thriving business was under threat. Like all Jewish-owned companies, Opekta faced Aryanization, a forced takeover by non-Jewish managers. Otto worked tirelessly to keep his business afloat, but the strain was evident. His optimism, a trait Miep had always admired, began to falter. He was not the same Otto, Miep would later say. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. Though not Jewish herself, Miep was deeply disturbed by the injustice unfolding around her. The growing restrictions placed on her Jewish friends felt like an affront to everything she believed in. "I could not understand how anyone could think of another human being as less than themselves," she said. Her marriage to John Gies in 1941 solidified her resolve. John, a social worker, was equally troubled by the occupation and the suffering it caused. The couple's shared values became a cornerstone of their partnership. They talked late into the night about what they were seeing and what they could do. Though they were just an ordinary couple with no political power or resources, they agreed on one thing: they would not be complicit in the face of injustice. Miep and John married on July 16, 1941, in a modest ceremony attended by close friends and family. There was no lavish reception, no extravagant celebration, just a simple gathering of people determined to find joy in a world increasingly defined by sorrow. Otto Frank, a close friend by then, attended the wedding with Edith and their daughters, Margot and Anne. For a brief moment, life felt normal again. Anne, just 12 years old at the time, was particularly thrilled to be part of the occasion. Always curious and full of energy, she peppered Miep with questions about her dress, her flowers, and what married life might be like. Miep found Anne's enthusiasm infectious. "She had this wonderful ability to make you forget everything else," Miep later said, "even the war." The wedding was a moment of light in an otherwise dark time. It was also a turning point for Miep and Jan. From that day forward, they faced the challenges of occupation not as individuals, but as partners. Their love became a source of strength, something to hold on to as the world around them continued to unravel. By late 1941, the Nazis had begun implementing even harsher measures. Jewish families were required to register their religion, a precursor to the Yellow Star badges that would soon become mandatory. Deportations had not yet begun in full force, but the signs were there for those who were paying attention. Miep and John decided to take action, albeit in small, cautious ways. John, through his work as a social worker, began helping people obtain fake identification papers. These documents were lifelines for those trying to evade arrest or deportation. It was dangerous work, but Jan's calm demeanor and resourcefulness made him adept at navigating the risks. Miep, too, began to resist in her own way. Though her job at Opekta placed her in a precarious position, working for a Jewish-owned company under constant scrutiny, she refused to distance herself from Otto Frank. She continued to assist him with his business dealings, finding creative ways to circumvent the restrictions imposed by the occupation. Her loyalty never wavered. When the opportunity arose, Miep also helped Jewish friends and neighbors in small but meaningful ways. She would deliver food, run errands, or simply offer a listening ear. These gestures, though seemingly minor, carried great weight in a time when acts of kindness were increasingly rare. It was during this time that Otto Frank began to seriously consider going into hiding. The pressure on Jewish families was mounting, and Otto, ever pragmatic, knew it was only a matter of time before the Nazis came for his. Miep was one of the first people he confided in. "I need to protect my family," he told her one evening after work. "But I can't do it alone." Miep felt a surge of fear at the implications of his words. Hiding a Jewish family was not just risky, it was punishable by death. Yet when Otto asked if she would help, her answer came without hesitation. "Of course," she said simply. It was not a moment of deliberation or doubt. For Miep, helping the Franks was a natural extension of her character, a fulfillment of the values she held most dear. The decision to hide the Frank family set into motion a series of quiet preparations. Though the annex behind Opekta's offices would not become their hiding place until mid-1942, the groundwork began in late 1941. Otto and Miep discussed logistics, how they would secure food, how they would avoid detection, and how they would maintain a semblance of normalcy under impossible circumstances. Miep took on the role of a planner and problem solver, traits that would later prove invaluable. She began discreetly stockpiling supplies, careful not to arouse suspicion. Each trip to the market required careful planning. She couldn't buy too much from one place, lest she attract unwanted attention. John, too, began laying the foundation for his role in what would become their shared mission. His network of contacts in the resistance grew, and he quietly gathered the resources they would need to support the Frank family and others in hiding. The couple did not discuss their plans with anyone beyond a small circle of trusted confidants. The risk of betrayal was too great. By the end of 1941, Miep and John were living under constant tension. The Nazi regime showed no signs of loosening its grip, and the future felt uncertain at best. Yet, through it all, they remained steadfast in their commitment to doing what they could to protect those who needed help. Their actions were not grand or dramatic. They were quiet, deliberate, and deeply courageous. Looking back on those years, Miep would later reflect on how ordinary it all felt at the time. "We did not think of ourselves as brave," she said. "We simply did what had to be done." It was like stepping into another world, Miep recalled of the day the Frank family entered the secret annex. A world where time stood still, where every sound carried the weight of life and death. The decision to go into hiding was not just a practical one. It was a surrender to uncertainty, where survival depended on trust, ingenuity, and unwavering courage. By mid-1942, the persecution of Jews in Amsterdam had reached a fever pitch. Families disappeared from their homes overnight, leaving behind only whispers of their fates. For Otto Frank, the time for planning was over. His family needed to vanish before they, too, were taken. The Frank family's hiding place was a concealed annex above Otto's former business premises at Prinsengracht 263. The space was small and unremarkable, accessible only through a movable bookcase that masked its entrance. Though the idea of living in such confined quarters seemed unimaginable, it was their best chance for survival. On July 6, 1942, the Frank family moved into the annex. Miep and her husband, Jan, played a critical role in orchestrating their transition. Miep carefully arranged for supplies to be brought in ahead of time and ensured that everything was in place. When the day came, she helped guide Otto, Edith, Margot, and Anne to their new refuge, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. Not long after the Franks settled in, they were joined by the Van Pels family, Herman, Auguste, and their teenage son, Peter. Later, Fritz Pfeffer, a dentist and family friend, also took shelter in the annex. The addition of more people brought new challenges. Space was even tighter, tempers occasionally flared, and the constant need for silence tested everyone's patience. For Miep, these challenges only deepened her resolve. She became the linchpin of the group's survival, organizing food, supplies, and updates from the outside world. Every day she faced the danger of discovery as she walked the streets of Amsterdam, carefully procuring just enough from multiple shops to avoid suspicion. Life for the annex's residents depended entirely on Miep and a small group of trusted allies, including Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, and Bep Voskoil. Together, they ensured the annex's occupants had the essentials to survive: food, clothing, medicine, and news. Miep's visits were particularly meaningful. She didn't just bring necessities, she brought connection and hope. Anne Frank, with her ever-curious mind, often peppered Miep with questions about the outside world. What were people saying? Were there any signs the war might end? Miep carefully filtered her answers, shielding Anne from the grimmest realities while still offering glimpses of hope. It was a delicate balance, Miep later said. You wanted to keep their spirits alive, but not fill them with false optimism. Miep also brought small comforts, books, magazines, and sometimes even treats like a piece of chocolate or fresh fruit. These tokens, though modest, were treasures to the annex's residents. They offered moments of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. Every day, Miep lived with the fear of being caught. The annex's location above a working office meant that employees, clients, and delivery workers came and went throughout the day. A misplaced sound, a dropped spoon, a cough, or a footstep could arouse suspicion. Miep and the other helpers took great care to ensure that the annex remained a secret, but the risk was ever present. Miep's errands were equally fraught with danger. Ration cards were tightly controlled, and obtaining enough food for 8 people was nearly impossible without drawing attention. Jan, through his connections in the resistance, helped secure illegal ration cards, but using them was a constant gamble. If caught, the consequences would be dire. Despite the risks, Miep never wavered. Her quiet determination became a source of strength for the annex's residents. Her bravery was in the small everyday acts, Anne Frank wrote in her diary. She is proof that goodness exists, even in the darkest times. Over time, Miep developed a deep bond with the annex's residents. She admired Otto Frank's calm leadership and Edith Frank's quiet dignity. She found joy in Anne's youthful exuberance and saw Peter Van Pels's shy kindness beneath his reserved exterior. Each person in the annex became more than a responsibility. They became family. Miep's connection with Anne was particularly poignant. The teenager's love of writing reminded Miep of her own creative spirit, long buried under the weight of war. She often brought Anne notebooks, pens, and books to nurture her talent. She had a gift, Miep later said. Her words were her way of making sense of a senseless world. Despite the constant tension, there were moments of laughter and joy in the annex. Birthdays, holidays, and other small milestones were celebrated with whatever resources Miep could muster. One memorable occasion was Anne's 14th birthday in June 1943. Miep brought her a bouquet of wildflowers and a small brooch, gifts that brought a rare smile to Anne's face. It wasn't much, Miep recalled, but it meant everything to her. These moments, though fleeting, were a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of unimaginable hardship, the annex's residents found ways to hold on to their humanity. The responsibility of keeping 8 people alive took a physical and emotional toll on Miep. She often worked late into the night, planning the next day's errands and worrying about the safety of the annex. Sleep was scarce, and the constant stress began to wear on her. Yet she never allowed herself to falter. Miep found strength in her husband, John, who supported her every step of the way. His quiet encouragement and shared commitment to the cause kept her grounded. Together, they faced the challenges of occupation with unwavering resolve. By 1942, the war had reached a turning point. German forces were facing increasing resistance across Europe, but the Nazi regime's grip on the Netherlands remained firm. For the Jewish community, the situation grew ever more dire. Deportations to concentration camps began in earnest, and the Dutch population was forced to reckon with the horrifying reality of the Holocaust. Miep's work as a helper was part of a broader resistance movement that operated in secrecy across the country. Thousands of people risked their lives to hide Jews, sabotage Nazi operations, and smuggle critical information. Though Miep's role was deeply personal, it was also part of a collective effort to resist tyranny. By the end of 1942, the annex's residents had settled into an uneasy rhythm of life in hiding. For Miep, each day was a delicate dance of deception and bravery. She did not see herself as a hero. "I was just doing what needed to be done," she later said. But history tells a different story. Miep's actions were a testament to the power of quiet courage. In a time of unimaginable darkness, she became a lifeline for those who had been cast into the shadows. Her story is a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the course of history. Each day felt like a balancing act on the edge of a knife, Miep later reflected. One wrong step, and it would all be over. For them, for us, for everything we were trying to protect. The year 1943 brought harsher conditions, increased risks, and moments of hope amid despair. For the residents of the secret annex and their helpers, survival became a test of endurance and ingenuity. By 1943, the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands was in full force. Amsterdam, once a city of freedom and culture, had become a hotbed of fear and repression. Jewish families were vanishing at an alarming rate, deported to camps from which few ever returned. Collaborators roamed the streets, and the slightest hint of resistance was met with brutal consequences. Miep and Jan Gies lived this reality every day. The dangers were not just theoretical, they were immediate and pressing. With food shortages worsening, even the simplest errands carried the risk of exposure. "I knew the streets had eyes," Miep said, "but we couldn't let fear stop us. The annex depended on us." Inside the annex, life settled into a tenuous routine. The 8 residents, Otto, Edith, Margot, and Anne Frank, Herman, Auguste, and Peter Van Pels, and Fritz Pfeffer, lived in constant silence during the day. Any noise could betray their presence to the workers in the warehouse below. Conversations were whispered, footsteps were muffled, and every creak of the floorboards carried the weight of dread. For Miep, the annex became a second home. She visited almost daily, bringing food, news, and occasional treats. Her presence was a lifeline, not just physically but emotionally. The residents clung to her updates from the outside world, desperate for any news of the war's progress. It was like being the keeper of hope, Miep recalled. I had to give them something to hold on to, even if it was just a glimmer. Anne, ever curious, bombarded Miep with questions about the outside world. What do people say about the war? Is it true the Americans are coming? Will we be free soon? Miep answered as truthfully as she could while shielding Anne from the harshest realities. She saw the young girl's need for optimism and did her best to nurture it. As the occupation dragged on, food became increasingly scarce. Ration cards were strictly controlled, and the black market grew both dangerous and expensive. Feeding 8 people in hiding required ingenuity and unwavering determination. Miep relied on multiple sources to gather supplies. She would visit different markets across the city, purchasing small amounts from each vendor to avoid suspicion. On days when supplies ran low, she shared her own food with the annex residents. Jan, through his connections in the resistance, secured illegal ration cards, but using them was a constant gamble. Discovery would mean arrest, or worse. Despite her efforts, there were days when the annex's pantry was nearly empty. The residents learned to ration every morsel, stretching meals as far as possible. We lived on the edge of hunger, Miep later said, but we never gave up. Amid the hardships, Miep and Jan found ways to bring moments of light to the annex. Birthdays and holidays were opportunities to remind the residents of their humanity, even in the darkest times. In March 1943, Peter Van Pels turned 16. Miep managed to find a small piece of chocolate, an impossible luxury in wartime, and presented it to him during one of her visits. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours." Peter, shy and often reserved, broke into a rare smile. For a moment, the annex felt like a home rather than a prison. Anne's 14th birthday in June 1943 was another milestone. Miep brought her a notebook and a bouquet of wildflowers, knowing how much the young girl cherished writing. Anne was overjoyed, immediately beginning to fill the pages with her thoughts and stories. She was like a candle in the dark, Miep said. Her spirit kept everyone going. As the months wore on, the toll of her responsibilities became increasingly evident. She was often exhausted, juggling her work at Opekta with the demands of supporting the annex. The stress of constant danger weighed heavily on her, but she refused to let it show. She drew strength from Jan, whose quiet support kept her grounded. "We leaned on each other," she said. "When one of us faltered, the other would remind us why we were doing this." Their partnership became a source of resilience, allowing them to face the seemingly insurmountable challenges together. In 1943, the threat of discovery loomed larger than ever. Rumors of informants circulated through Amsterdam, and neighbors began to eye each other with suspicion. For her and the other helpers, the fear of betrayal was a constant presence. "We trusted no one outside our circle," she said. "The risk was too great." One close call came when a warehouse worker mentioned hearing noises from above. Miep and Victor Kugler, one of the helpers, quickly dismissed the concern, explaining that the old building often creaked and groaned. It was a narrow escape, but it underscored how precarious the situation had become. Outside the annex, the war raged on. The Dutch resistance grew bolder, sabotaging Nazi operations and spreading underground newspapers. Miep and Jan, though not directly involved in armed resistance, supported the movement in subtle ways. Jan's work with fake identification papers continued, while Miep helped transport messages and supplies when needed. At the same time, the Nazis tightened their grip on the Netherlands. Raids became more frequent, and collaborators were rewarded for turning in Jewish families or resistance members. The atmosphere in Amsterdam was one of pervasive fear, but also quiet defiance. "We knew the risks," she said, "but we also knew what was at stake." By the end of 1943, the annex's residents had survived nearly 18 months in hiding. For Miep, each day felt like a victory, a testament to the power of ordinary people standing against extraordinary evil. She refused to see herself as a hero, insisting that her actions were simply what anyone would do. "I wasn't brave," she said. "I was just doing my job." But history tells a different story. Miep's relentless dedication, her courage in the face of fear, and her unwavering commitment to the annex's residents were nothing short of extraordinary. Her quiet heroism stands as a reminder that even in the darkest times, the actions of one person can make all the difference. It was August 4th, 1944, when the fragile sanctuary of the secret annex was shattered. That morning began like so many others for Miep, with her heading to the office to prepare for another day of supporting the annex residents. She had grown accustomed to the routine, quiet errands, carefully timed deliveries, and an ever-present sense of danger. But that day, danger came knocking, literally. A Dutch informant had betrayed the annex's location to the Nazi authorities. Karl Silberbauer, an SS officer, arrived at Prinsengracht 263, accompanied by several Dutch collaborators. They stormed the building, interrogated the staff, and discovered the hidden entrance to the annex. The Franks, the Van Pels, and Fritz Pfeffer were arrested and dragged out of their hiding place. Miep and the other helpers, Victor Kugler, Johannes Kleiman, and Bep Voskuil, were questioned but not immediately arrested. Miep's quick thinking likely saved her life. When Silberbauer began interrogating her, she maintained her composure and feigned ignorance about the situation. Remarkably, Silberbauer decided to let her go, though she was warned not to interfere further. Miep held onto the diary, keeping it hidden and safe. Her hope was that Anne would one day return to claim it. She had no way of knowing that Anne's words would one day become a voice for millions. The arrest of the annex residents was a crushing blow for Miep and the other helpers. Despite their extraordinary efforts, their worst fear had come true. "I felt like I had failed them," Miep said. "I had promised to keep them safe, and now they were gone." In the days and weeks that followed, Miep and Jan focused on survival. Though they were not arrested, they remained under scrutiny. Miep considered fleeing, but ultimately decided to stay in Amsterdam, where she continued to support the resistance in small but meaningful ways. On June 3, 1945, nearly a year after the annex's residents had been arrested, Otto Frank returned to Amsterdam. He was the sole survivor. Edith had died in Auschwitz, Margot and Anne had succumbed to typhus at Bergen-Belsen, and the others had perished in various camps. The news was devastating, but Otto's presence brought a glimmer of hope. When Otto confided in Miep that he wanted to honor Anne's memory, she presented him with the diary she had saved. The pages, filled with Anne's thoughts, dreams, and observations, became a source of solace for Otto. "Her voice lives on," he told Miep, "even if she is gone." In 1947, Anne's writings were published in Dutch under the title Het Achterhuis, The Secret Annex. The book was an immediate success, resonating with readers across the Netherlands. Over time, it was translated into multiple languages and became one of the most widely read and impactful accounts of the Holocaust. For Miep, the diary's publication was both a triumph and a reminder of loss. She was proud of Anne's legacy, but remained haunted by the events that had taken place. "I did not save Anne's life," Miep said, "but I was able to save her words." After the war, Miep lived a quiet life in Amsterdam with Jan. She rarely spoke about her experiences, insisting that her actions were not heroic, but simply what anyone should do. It wasn't until the 1950s, when Anne's diary gained international acclaim, that Miep began sharing her story. She dedicated her life to spreading Anne's message and promoting tolerance. She traveled the world, speaking about the importance of standing up against injustice. "Even ordinary people can make a difference," she often said. "You just have to choose to act." Miep passed away on January 11, 2010, at the age of 100. She lived long enough to witness the enduring impact of Anne's diary and the countless lives it touched. Her quiet courage and unwavering commitment to doing what was right remain an inspiration to this day. Through her actions, she showed that even in the darkest times, humanity can prevail. Her story is a reminder that small acts of kindness, driven by compassion and courage, can change the course of history.